Tonight, after Israel and Hamas agree to a ceasefire deal, the painful road still ahead.
We are hoping they are good and well.
What we know about the hostages, the security details, and the promises made to the people of Gaza. Team Canada tries to map a coherent tariff strategy. Are all the players on the same page?
United we stand, divided we fall.
Certified lover boy, certified pedophile.
And Drake takes a year-defining rap beef from the charts to the courts.
He may have some valid points.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thank you for joining us. Hamas and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire deal, a window of hope, a chance for peace after a harrowing 15 months of misery and bloodshed. 467 days after Hamas-led militants killed nearly 1,200 people in Israel, they continue to hold 94 captives, a third of whom are believed to be dead. And Israel has unleashed unimaginable suffering. More than 46,000 people killed, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. 1.9 million people displaced. More than two-thirds of all buildings damaged or destroyed. So we have full team coverage tonight with Sasha Petrusek on the latest from the region, Margaret Evans on what comes next, Paul Hunter in Washington with Global Reaction, and Sarah Levitt with Voices from here in Canada. So let's start with Sasha Petrusek, showing us the news of the ceasefire spreading even as Israel hits more targets in Gaza.
Moments after the ceasefire announcement, Israeli bombardment continued in Gaza, killing 18 people, and with days to go before the deal comes into effect. But just the prospect of peace brought tears of joy to Palestinians who've endured 15 months of death and destruction. I cry from my heart, she says.
You can see the jubilation in the faces of the people here. We are really overwhelmed with happiness because the bloodshed has ended.
Optimism in Israel, too, tempered by uncertainty for hostage families.
Actually, we don't know their conditions. We are hoping they are good and well, and we'll see them soon as possible, alive and healthy.
33 hostages are to be freed, the first 3 on Sunday. In exchange, Israel is to pull back its troops to a perimeter within Gaza's borders less than a kilometer wide. It's agreed to let in 3 times more food and other aid to ease the suffering and to let Palestinians back to their homes, or what's left of them, in Gaza's north. And like the last time there was a brief ceasefire to exchange hostages for prisoners, hundreds of Palestinians are to be released from Israeli jails. Hamas was defiant, taking pride in its devastating October 7th attack and its refusal to be pushed out of Gaza. Israeli leaders defended the deal. It will bring deeply painful moments, says President Isaac Herzog, but it's needed to bring our sons and daughters home. Some Israelis protested the ceasefire after it was announced, vowing to keep fighting against Hamas. But for most, freeing hostages is Israel's most pressing priority.
Israel's government hasn't shown nearly as much urgency, with hardline members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition vowing to vote against the ceasefire in Parliament here. Adrian?
So, Sasha, a lot of people, including the U.S. president, have noted sort of repeatedly today that this deal has been on the table in some form since last spring.
Well, Adrian, domestic political pressure probably has delayed it for months. And even now, Netanyahu's office says he won't make any official announcement about the deal until a few more details are worked out.
All right. Sasha Petrusek in Jerusalem for us tonight. Thank you, Sasha. Senior international correspondent Margaret Evans joins us now from London. So, Margaret, obviously a lot of hope tonight, but certainly real challenges to making this deal last.
That's right, Adrian. I think, what negotiators have done is managed to win this very fragile 6-week truce by putting off some of the bigger issues to the second and third phases of the deal, because that's where, the real bottom lines for Hamas and for Israel lie. Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire. It wants all Israeli soldiers out. Israel says it can't do that and guarantee the security of its citizens. And if you'll remember, the Israeli government has said there can't be an end to the war until Hamas is completely eradicated. In phase 2, there'll also be another discussion about the remaining Israeli hostages and remaining Palestinian political prisoners in the eyes of Hamas that they want to see released from Israeli jails. Israel says those are people with blood on their hands, and we can't let that happen.
And Margaret, it really is the case that the further down the text of that deal you get, the more snags you see, right? The post-war plan in phase 3, for example, in Gaza, is really tricky.
That's right, Adrian. That's when they're supposed to talk about reconstruction of Gaza, if that's even possible, given the scale of destruction there now. It also implies that that's when you'd be talking about who's going to be in charge in Gaza. The Israelis want to be able to dictate that. The Palestinians say that's not possible. I think then you find that you've got, the biggest problem of all saved to the end, and it leaves more time for things to go awry in the interim.
All right, Margaret Evans in London. Thanks, Margaret. World leaders have been quick to show their support for this deal, while also emphasizing the need for the ceasefire to hold beyond that first phase. And in the United States, as Paul Hunter shows us, there was a dispute over which president made the difference.
As at long last, I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached.
For Joe Biden, mere days from the end of his presidency, a triumph he was quick to claim as his own.
This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement.
It's clear the Biden administration played a key role in forging the deal, but so too the special envoy of incoming President Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, who worked with and alongside the Biden team in the talks overseas. Trump now also claiming credit. This epic ceasefire agreement, he wrote, could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November. Trump had earlier said there'd be hell to pay by Hamas if there was no deal by the time he takes office Monday. For what it's worth, Biden was asked, so who gets credit for this, him or Trump?
Is that a joke?
That aside, Prime Minister Trudeau among those, saying the deal brings hope.
Hope that we can now focus our attention on a true, lasting political solution to this conflict, a two-state solution with Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in safety, security, and dignity.
Long overdue news, wrote UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Our attention must turn to how we secure a permanently better future, grounded in a two-state solution.
Un'ottima notizia.
Great news, said Italy's foreign minister. It's an important step towards peace. And from the United Nations,
our priority now must be to ease the tremendous suffering caused by this conflict.
But the impossibly complex job of getting to a permanent peace now moves to the next president. The challenge and resolve to see the deal all the way through is for Donald Trump. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
News of a ceasefire has come with a flood of emotions here in Canada. Hope, of course, mixed with concern it could all fall apart. Sarah Levitt now with how those with loved ones caught in this war are navigating this new uncertainty.
Jawed Abu Aza's eyes have been glued to the TV for days. News of the ceasefire brings the Palestinian Montrealer cautious relief.
Now we have freedom. I know there is no houses, there is no other place, but at least they can sleep without airplane. We were talking 15 months. Every day, war.
Abu Aza has spent those months trying to help friends and family who have survived while mourning the deaths of those who have not.
I lost a lot of people.
We're fighting in the hope of getting his body back.
Israeli-Canadian Yasmin Majal has also lost someone. Her cousin Omer Nutra was thought to be alive, but this past December, the soldier's family found out he'd been killed on October 7th.
It is a very difficult shift to make from the hope of hugging him again to the hope of burying him.
His body believed to be in Gaza.
Right now is the most hopeful that people have been.
The impact of this war has transcended borders.
It's ushered in, I would say, an almost unprecedented dynamic of divisiveness and polarization.
Canada has seen encampments go up and protesters out on the streets. Some led to clashes between pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian demonstrators, others more serious. Shots fired at schools and firebombs thrown at synagogues.
What we've seen, as I said, has been an unprecedented explosion of anti-Semitism in the campus community, in the public squares of Canada.
A ceasefire may not change that, Kotler says, but he has hope. Others say the next months are key.
If this ceasefire does not hold, no one can stop the situation of getting back to being crazy again. What's next? You're happy, but you're also anxious.
A sentiment shared by many. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
So many emotions hitting hard tonight. We will bring you voices from Gaza and Israel for a raw look at what people are going through. Plus, why a ceasefire right now and whether it will last? That's ahead on The Breakdown. In Ottawa, almost all premiers say they are united in a team approach to Donald Trump's tariff threat. But Danielle Smith made herself an outlier today, refusing to sign a joint statement. Olivia Stefanovic shows us how it played out.
This press conference was planned to be premiers only. But after a day-long meeting, they decided to share the podium with the Prime Minister.
There's never been a time that's more important for Canadians to be united.
Mostly united, perhaps not all.
I will point out that Danielle did join us for the conversation and contributed significantly.
Alberta's Danielle Smith joined virtually from Panama. A few days ago, she met Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, a trip she made without telling the federal government or other premiers.
We didn't get a heads up, no. I'm interested in learning more.
Smith refused to sign Wednesday's joint statement among the federal and provincial governments.
There will always be robust discussions around this table. Everyone has a job that is defending the interests of their own constituents, their own industries.
Smith posted her explanation on social media, criticizing Ottawa for continuing to float the idea of cutting off energy supply to the U.S. and imposing export tariffs.
That's her choice. That is her choice. But I have a little different theory. I have a different theory that protect your jurisdiction, but country comes first. Canada's a priority.
The joint statement by First Ministers makes no mention of using oil and gas to counter the U.S. President-elect's threats.
I see energy as Canada's queen in this game of chess. We don't need to expose our queen too early.
But they say all options for retaliation remain on the table. Countermeasures on over $150 billion worth of U.S. imports.
We need to be very clear with an American audience that Trump's tariff tax is going to make life more expensive for Americans.
The Prime Minister and premiers also say they'll be there for Canadian workers whose sectors could be devastated if Trump imposes tariffs. He'll be inaugurated 5 days from now. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
All right, let's bring in Chief Political Correspondent Rosie Barton. So, Rosie, as we heard there, most of the premiers and Ottawa, of course, left on the same page. How much does that matter?
Yeah, Adrienne, at the beginning of the day, they weren't even planning to have a press conference together, the premiers and the Prime Minister. So this show of unity is really significant at this critical time for Canada. Premiers who don't agree with the federal government on much at all agreed on this common approach to keep all possible options on the table, to make sure they don't show their cards to Trump too soon, and to make sure that no one region or sector carries a bigger burden than another. So the fact that the Premier of Alberta is the only leader who doesn't agree with some of this approach, that's important, of course, and other premiers made it very clear they don't think it's particularly helpful. Doug Ford in particular said, listen, you have to protect your jurisdiction, but country ultimately comes first.
So, Rosie, I suppose as everybody waits to see what Trump decides to do, what do we watch for next?
Cabinet ministers, provincial officials, they're all heading to Washington in the coming days to continue those efforts to convince Trump not to impose those 25% tariffs that will also damage the American economy, and they'll make that point. On Monday, there'll be a special cabinet retreat in this country to discuss trade and security and the response. And as the president-elect gets ready for a historic day of his own, Adrian, people in Canada are really going to be on the edge of their seats to see whether he follows through with these threats or not.
Absolutely. Rosie Barton in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Rosie. There was a remarkable lineup of people in the cold and snow today. They put the facade of Canada's universal healthcare system in stark relief. Each was hoping to get a family doctor, something they've lived years without. Jamie Strachan shows us why some did and some did not.
Can I give you a hug now or later? Thank you.
After hours in a line that snaked around Walkerton's Legion Hall and down surrounding streets, Susan Marshall is cold.
I'm sorry, but I'm frozen. My lips are frozen right now.
But the payoff is huge. After 5 years, she will finally have a family doctor. Walkerton is getting a new physician. 500 patients will get a spot. No triage, though, just first come, first served.
I actually saw this post on Facebook, of all places. And I thought with today's weather that it definitely, there wouldn't be so many folks.
It says that there's a problem. If there's this many people willing to come out in a snowstorm to try and get a doctor.
Since the early morning hours, more than 1,000 people came to line up here in the cold, in the snow, all desperate, all with stories of what life has been like without a family doctor.
My husband, he has fairly serious health issues, and many times I feel like I'm not able to cope.
Most end up in the ER or simply go untreated.
I just absolutely waited out until I absolutely have to go to the hospital.
There is similar desperation in many parts of the country. More than 6 million Canadians don't have a family doctor.
We're seeing a Hunger Games all across Ontario.
It's unsustainable, says the president of the Ontario Medical Association.
What happens when you can't find a family doctor? You end up using the emergency department for care. You end up missing cancer, another important preventive care.
Now, in Walkerton, some just got a much-needed lifeline.
We've had 5 years now without a doctor, so it feels like we won the lottery.
But in Canada's new reality of universal health care, many others who braved the cold and snow lost again. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Walkerton, Ontario.
The United States is banning a food additive that has been controversial for years.
So red dye number 3 is made out of petroleum.
But which foods contain the dye, and will Canada follow suit? Drake's beef with Kendrick Lamar is heading for court.
He may have some valid points when you get into the allegations.
Why Drake is going after the music label. And a kitesurfer comes to the rescue of a drowning woman.
You gave me a hug and you said you saved my life.
We're back in 2. Just hours after taking credit for the Middle East ceasefire deal, President Joe Biden gave his farewell address to the American people. He warned several issues are threatening democracy.
Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit.
That speech was the last major address of Biden's political career, spanning more than 50 years. Well, the pace is picking up in Washington, where Donald Trump's cabinet picks are going through their confirmation hearings. Among them, Marco Rubio, who got the nod for Secretary of State and shared his views on key foreign policy issues, including the war in Ukraine.
In order to achieve objectives like the one that needs to occur in Ukraine, it is important for everyone to be realistic. There will have to be concessions made by the Russian Federation, but also by the Ukrainians.
Rubio went on to say Russia will not take control of Ukraine, but he believes Ukraine will need to concede some of the territory it's lost in order to end the war.
I will not politicize that office. I will not target people
simply because of their political affiliation.
And that was Pam Bondi, Trump's pick for Attorney General. The former Florida Attorney General was repeatedly pressed on her willingness to say no to Trump and to maintain an independent Justice Department. To that, she said the Department of Justice will not be weaponized, though she also refused to pledge that she will not prosecute journalists, something Trump threatened during the campaign. Well, U.S. regulators have banned a controversial food additive found in everything from candy to cough syrup. Red dye number 3 gives products their bright red color. Aaron Collins looks at the claims and why Canada isn't following suit.
It's in everything from candy to cupcakes, but the additive that makes these foods red now banned in the U.S.
So red dye number 3 is made out of petroleum. It's what gives that bright cherry red color to a lot of foods.
That dye linked decades ago to thyroid cancer in rats, connected to hyperactivity in kids too. But the controversial additive, an unknown for many Canadians.
I do not know enough about it. I don't have science knowledge.
I guess I would have to know a little bit more about what some of the impacts and implications are.
The U.S. banned the use of the dye in cosmetics years ago. The European Union only allows it in processed cherries and pet food. But in Canada, the compound is still widely used in hundreds of products, a worry even for those Canadians unfamiliar with the dye.
Well, anything that's bad for us, we don't need in our food. We have so many chemicals right now. Why not ban it?
It shouldn't be here. You don't need to have it. Use beets.
For its part, Health Canada says the dye is safe and has no plans to ban it. In a statement, the agency writes that claims the additive causes cancer are not supported by the available scientific evidence. Well, the health impact of the compound is far from conclusive. Still, some experts say banning the dye makes sense.
We don't need these things. You know, we can have a very, very healthy diet that does not include food dyes that have a questionable history.
Well, the ban comes as Robert Kennedy is set to take over as U.S. Secretary of Health, promising big changes to what goes into the food Americans eat.
President Trump and I are going to stop the mass poisoning of American children.
Despite the ban, the dye won't be out of U.S. foods right away. Manufacturers have 2 years to ditch the additive. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
We want to return to our top story. A ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas, and with it, a renewed hope.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't even know how to feel.
We'll hear from the people whose lives have been irreparably changed.
The hope of hugging him again to the hope of burying him.
And what it could mean going forward. Plus.
They not like us. They not like us. They not like us.
Drake sues his label over a song he says puts him in danger.
You think the bagel let you disrespect pop?
The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. Canadian rapper Drake is alleging that his record label put him in personal danger by helping to falsely paint him as a sexual criminal and predator. That is the thrust of a new lawsuit filed in U.S. federal court. Thomas Degg shows us how Drake's feud with a rival rapper led to the explosive accusations.
They not like us. They not like us. They not.
Soaring to the top of the charts last year as a viral earworm, Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us is now the focus of a defamation suit filed by his Canadian rival, Drake. The Toronto megastar is suing Universal Music, the record giant that represents both artists, blaming the company for a campaign to create a viral hit out of a rap track that falsely accuses Drake of being a pedophile.
He may have some valid points when you get into the allegations.
Indeed, that song makes unproven accusations that Drake strongly denies. Drake claims Universal used bots to artificially inflate the song's popularity on Spotify. And he points to this official illustration for Lamar's track showing Drake's Toronto home with red markers, suggesting he's housing sex offenders. All of it, he says, leading last May to a drive-by shooting outside his mansion. Drake says his security guard very nearly got killed. Recounting publicly for the first time, Drake and others labored to keep the man alive by applying pressure to the gunshot wound with towels. Blood was everywhere. The Star says he even pulled his young son out of a Toronto school over safety concerns. Drake alleges Universal purposely drove down his popularity as his contract was up for renewal.
His value was up here, and now, ironically, they could argue that his value is down here. How did that happen? I think that's what he's trying to get at.
Universal Music Group calls Drake's allegations untrue and illogical. As for Lamar, he's set to headline the Super Bowl halftime show next month, meaning an audience of millions will likely hear "Not Like Us" once more. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
Now let's break down the big story that the whole world is watching tonight. For the first time in 15 months of war, there's relief.
The ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached.
But the sense of loss inescapable in both Gaza and Israel.
It's too late, but finally it's happened. Let's hope.
And there's still fear this could all unravel. Christine Birak shows us Israelis, Palestinians, both in the Middle East and beyond, torn now between trepidation and finally hope.
On both sides, emotions came pouring out. Hearts broken time and time again, now daring to hope yet again. This is a precious opportunity for those both fleeing and captured to go home.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't even know how to feel. My heart was just on my toes, as we say. We say in Arabic, my heart was at my toes for the entire day.
Shema Ahmed, an engineering student, spoke to us from Gaza. She says the destruction isn't over yet. Bombs are still dropping.
Before a ceasefire is reached, there's always a lot of bombing, always a lot of murders. But hopefully it passes peacefully.
Israelis are soon hoping to see another scene like this one. Hostages finally coming home. Relief for sure, but all of it mixed with a deep sense of unease.
We had no opportunity to connect with him since October 7th when he was kidnapped in front of my sister and my two baby nieces.
Moshe Levy says his brother-in-law, Omri Moran, was kidnapped 467 days ago. Last April, Hamas released a video appearing to show Miran. His family doesn't know if he's still alive, and if so, when he might be coming home.
This is only going to be only the first phase of an agreement that will not necessarily ensure the release of all the hostages.
It's an excruciating weight, even for those who know their loved one is gone.
The other families deserve to be reunited with their loved ones.
Canadian-Israeli Yasmin Magal thought her cousin Omer Nutra was taken alive. Last month they learned he died on October 7th. His body is being held by Hamas.
We deserve to have a grave. I'm just hopeful that we're on the right path for that.
For Palestinians who fled their homes, moved countries to flee 15 months of war, this moment feels bittersweet.
It is really the moment we want to see end of the killing, end of the suffering of the people.
Issam Hamad moved his family to Ireland. He's not sure if and when they will return.
Well, I think Gaza probably required more than 10 years to return to where it was, if there was enough resources allocated to Gaza for the people to start building their own life.
If all goes to plan, the release of hostages begins Sunday, and 600 truckloads of humanitarian aid will start arriving in Gaza. Millions now wait, cautiously optimistic that this war is truly over.
As part of the ceasefire deal, 24-year-old Romy Gonen could be among the hostages released. She was abducted by Hamas militants during their massacre at the Nova Music Festival. Her cousin, her Canadian cousin, Maureen Lachem, joins us now from Toronto. Maureen, thank you for being with us. I'm so curious, do you have any sense at all of when you will find out if Romy is among those coming out, or even how she is?
So I can tell you that a few weeks right before December, I received word from my family that Romy is alive, but not in good condition because, as you had mentioned, she had gotten shot in the arm on October 7th, right before she was abducted. But that's a few weeks ago. In the condition that they're at, every single second counts. So that's tough, but we're holding on to that.
I'm sure you are. I know the ceasefire didn't come as a total surprise, right? It's been close for a while, but given everything you knew, I'm curious what that moment meant to you when it was finally announced today.
Aside from feeling and experiencing every single emotion that's possible, I would say the biggest struggle is I find myself teetering between fragile optimism and deep unease. On the one hand, I am filled with excitement and just happiness at the prospect that Romy and the hostages, all of them, all 98 of them, will be coming home. But at the same time, I'm extremely fearful. I'm filled with fear, fear of who we're negotiating with. These people thrive on cruelty, but but for my own mental sanity, and to believe, I have to believe. So despite all these polar opposites and all this roller coaster of emotions, I'm optimistic, and this is actually the first time in 15 months and 8 days that I have felt optimistic. I feel that this is going to go through.
I hope that feeling sticks. Just listening to you talk, what's your sense of how all of this has changed you, changed your family?
Well, October 7th has profoundly changed me. It's changed my view on humanity. It's changed the way I want to go about my life. It's brought me closer to my Judaism. My family is definitely a lot closer.
That's a lot. That's a
lot. I don't think that we've really had an opportunity to really process any of it. And I do think, and just to deal with the trauma, deal with everything that we've seen over the last 15 months, everything that we've heard in the last 15 months, I don't think that we've even been able to process any of it.
Well, I hope you get some time together and some good time together soon. Maureen, thank you for spending some of your time with us now. We really appreciate it. Best thoughts for you and Romy.
Thank you so much.
I'm joined now by Arwa Damon, a former foreign correspondent for CNN and co-founder of the humanitarian organization INARA. So it's in that capacity, Arwa, that you have been in and out of Gaza a lot. I think most recently you were last there in early December. You're in Berlin now, but I know your mind and heart are in Gaza. What are your colleagues telling you there?
There's this sort of overwhelming sense of, is this really going to happen? Did we somehow survive the bombs? And it's also coupled with this very intense, difficult to describe sense of, anxiety, perhaps might be the best way to describe it, because now they're going to have to really face this depth of indescribable pain of everything that has been lost. And then there's also the knowledge that nothing is entirely guaranteed. The fact that bombs will no longer be falling on Gaza is something that people have been craving, but they've also been craving food and blankets and warmth and access to medical care. And so a big question right now is, how are all of those other moving parts that are needed to save lives in Gaza actually going to come together? Because if the ceasefire comes into effect, if it actually holds, if the bombs stop falling and the humanitarian efforts aren't increased to the levels that they need to be, people are going to still die every single day.
Absolutely. So on that matter of the blankets, the medical aid, I know that there's like a surge of aid that's ready in El Arish, I think in Egypt, just to go in. What needs to be the priority?
You know, I get asked that question all the time, and it's really hard to answer because right now aid is at such low levels. Do you try to prioritize food so that people are no longer starving, or do you prioritize blankets so that people are no longer freezing to death? The only way to really understand that is to recognize that we cannot talk about prioritizing aid because everything right now is a priority, because the ways that people are dying and suffering include from hunger, from cold, from lack of an ability to access medicine. And then another key critical issue too is these medical evacuations. Look, we have a little girl who we've been working on trying to get out of Gaza who has a highly treatable disease that doctors are fairly confident is what's known as a protein C deficiency. They're not entirely confident in that because the needed tests cannot be run in Gaza. And she is already highly likely going to lose one of her limbs due to this, and it's spreading very quickly to the rest of her body. So these medical evacuations starting back up are key and critical.
Okay, speed is of the essence, and I know you're going to head back in as quickly as you can. Arwa Damon, thanks very much. The ceasefire deal remains fragile. It will now be up to Donald Trump to help see it through.
This deal was developed and negotiated under my administration, but its terms will be implemented, for the most part, by the next administration.
So what will it take to make the deal stick? That's next. With the ceasefire now in sight, what lies ahead for Gaza? Will the agreement to pause the violence hold together in the short term? And why a breakthrough now after so many months spent trying? So let's break this all down with Janice Stein, the founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and Khalid El-Gindi, adjunct professor at Georgetown University in Washington. Khalid, if we could start with you, can you walk us through what precisely will change on the ground in Gaza and in Israel after Sunday?
Yeah, well, if all goes well, there will be at least a temporary cessation of military activities on all sides in Gaza, which that would be a major development. The Israeli army will redeploy to the outskirts of the Gaza Strip's borders. In most instances, there will be a couple of pockets where they will remain inside Gaza. There will be, I believe, about 33 Israeli hostages released, and that includes both living and deceased, in return for some number of Palestinian prisoners. And I think most importantly for the Palestinians on the ground in Gaza is there's supposed to be a major surge in humanitarian assistance after months of deprivation there. So I think it's quite a lot, and it's quite a tall order, but we'll have to see how it plays out.
Absolutely. Janice, I remember you saying after November of 2023, which was sort of the first ceasefire, that the next one would be the permanent one, that it had to be. Does that view still hold for you? Is that what this is?
You know, I was really optimistic at that point. Adrian, never imagined that it would be this long. I think there's a constellation of factors now, though, that is going to make it very difficult to resume the fighting. I don't underestimate the challenges here as we move from the first phase to the second, but I'm going to stick to that we will not see any major resumption of fighting.
What makes you say that?
So I think, you know, there's a lot of discussion that this deal was to be had last May, and that is absolutely correct. So what's changed since then? Two big things. One, there has been a strategic rebalancing in the region. Hezbollah has suffered real reverses. Bashar al-Assad is gone in Syria, and for Iran, this is a major defeat. That leaves Hamas in a much more isolated position than it was before. And equally important is the role that President-elect Trump and his people have played. They have left no room for Netanyahu to move and maneuver on this. And I think that was absolutely critical here.
I'm hearing your confidence, but there's also a tenuous nature to your voice. Khaled, I'm wondering what rides on this working, and not just in Gaza and Israel.
There's so much riding on this this working, and I wish I were as optimistic as Janice. I think there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong. Any hold up in the implementation of any piece of this could easily snowball and lead to a resumption of fighting, particularly when we consider that Netanyahu is coming to this very, very reluctantly and with a coalition that is deeply divided, and prominent members of his coalition have said they've torpedoed these efforts in the past, and they will work to torpedo this one. And so, and the fact that Netanyahu doesn't have a victory trophy, doesn't have, Hamas is still intact, and it exists. Of course, it is greatly weakened. Its leadership has been decimated. Its physical capabilities have been decimated, but it is gaining recruits at a faster pace than Israel can kill them. And that is not a success story. So I worry that, Netanyahu and company may be looking for any excuse to go back and fight, because that's ultimately what keeps him in power, is prolonging the war.
The responsibility for, monitoring this, ensuring that doesn't happen, implementing the deal, sort of will fall under the watch of the Trump administration. Janice, I'm wondering, what are you then going to watch for in terms of how this is handled?
Well, I don't underestimate the challenges as we move ahead. And I'm focused on the bigger strategic picture. One, I think those two extremist parties in the Israeli coalition, their bluff has been called. And I think it was a bluff, the threat to leave the government, and they will not have the capacity of veto that they've had up till now. Secondly, I think the key thing to watch for here is day 16, when those negotiations for the second phase start. Those are much harder than the first phase, and that's going to take tremendous push from the Trump administration on both parties. The kind of leverage they actually exercised this week, they have to be serious. They have to be willing to stay the course. But I think that is the major change. They are single-minded. They do not want this fighting to resume.
And at some point very soon, we will have a conversation about what the future of Gaza looks like. Who's in charge? Who pays the bills? Who polices the streets? This is going to be a huge conversation. But for now, Janice Stein, Khaled El-Gindi, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Coming up, a drowning woman just seconds from going under, rescued in the nick of time. How an Olympic kitesurfer fought the current to save her life. Next in our moment. Just seconds before this image was captured, the young woman you can see right there was caught in a riptide a long way from shore and desperately struggling to keep her head above water. So lucky for her, Olympic kitesurfer Bruno Lobo, the only one on the water that day, well, he noticed her struggling and jumped into action. The rescue is our moment.
For sure, if he was not there, so I don't know if he could hold a few more minutes. I decided to go to just do a quick session, and when I heard someone screaming, and then I recognized that was someone drowning, and then I did a turn with the kite, and I tried to help as soon as possible. It was a very scary moment, so I tried to calm down her. I said to her to carry on my back. And at some moments she was very tired, exhausted, and she almost left me. And I said, hold on, stay with me, breathe. And that helped as well to floating us and bring it safe from shore. Some people that were on the beach, they arrived and everything was okay. She gave me a hug and said, you saved my life. And she cried, and it was a very special moment. And for sure, this is my biggest achievement. I can use the sport to save a life. So yeah, this is my biggest trophy, for sure.
Wow. So she will realize at some point precisely how lucky she was. So not only are we talking about an incredible athlete, you know, he competed at the Paris 2024 Olympics, but he also graduated from medical school in 2017. He's in orthopedics. So right person, right place, right time. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.